Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And Jeff and I are going to be talking about the major issues of the week. And Jeff, as we go into 2022, we're going to be talking a lot about politics. We're going to be talking primarily about the governor's race, and it continues to expand with the number of candidates in. And the latest, as you had predicted back in October, Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin is now running as a Republican in the race for governor to replace J.B. Pritzker.
And he's spending money. He didn't get his money yet, apparently, from Griffin. People say it's coming up soon, but he did get an injection of more than $1 million led by Ron Gidwitz and fellow rich people. And he's shown a really, will show people the ad. I would say it's quite good, and a fairly good ad by Jesse Sullivan as well. So money's being spent. The Republicans are in town. The mainstream media are still going to ignore them. We'll see how long the mainstream media can ignore the Republican Party. That's the question.
Well, let's start off. We got a number of things we want to cover. So let's start off with the ad from Richard Irvin where he's introducing himself. I will say this was off his website. It ran about 3 minutes, and we've cut it down to about 1.5 minutes.
Crime is out of control. So is corruption. Negligence and incompetence have destroyed our finances. So taxes go up. People move out because there's nothing you can do about it. But that's not true. I know it's not. So I went to college on the GI Bill, then law school, to become a hands-on prosecutor, going on police raids, taking back one corner or apartment complex at a time, putting gangbangers, drug dealers, and wife beaters in prison. Fund the police is dumb, dangerous, and it costs lives. And I believe that all lives matter. Every family should be safe. Running our second largest city, crimes come down because the police budget has gone up. I hired more cops each year. We've recruited new companies, turned old properties into economic engines, and we've controlled spending, balanced budgets, so residents got property tax relief. My city is now safer, stronger, and full of opportunity. I want that for Illinois. Madigan and his ilk, Governor Pritzker, they've done so much damage. But I promise you, we can overcome big challenges. It's what I'm good at. But we must dare to dream of an Illinois that is free, prosperous, and proud enough to truly be the land of Lincoln again. I'm Richard Irvin. I'm running for governor of Illinois. And with your help, we will take our state back.
Richard Irvin. What do you think, Jeff?
Nicely done. It's a very well done ad. They've had a lot of time to work on it. There's a lot of money behind that. But what can you say? It's just well done. I mean, it hits you with the major issue in the nation, in the state, in the city, crime. Just gone completely out of control. Bonkers, carjackings all over, homicides, muggings, whatever. And the the Democrats are caught flat-footed. Speaker Welch has just got his head in the sand and said, "Oh yeah, we'll work on this. We'll take care of it. We'll maybe tweak a few things." Out of his effing mind. This is a major problem. Why doesn't somebody shake the speaker? They're not going to win this thing easily. We'll see what happens in the Republican primary. But, the times are a-changing, Speaker.
Well,
let's he's got his friends.
Let's talk about the guy behind the scene of the Richard Irvin that we need to point out is the man who is the richest person in the state, richer even than Governor Pritzker. And who is that, Jeff? The man who started Citadel Investments.
Ken Griffin. His companies are valued at over $21 billion. That is 7 times the net worth of Pritzker. He could blow him out of the water. I mean, really, if you're J.B. Pritzker, you're really kind of shaky.
I don't think J.B. Pritzker was that concerned about running for re-election until Richard Irvin got in, and Pritzker is concerned, I think, now, looking between the lines, because of the money that now Ken Griffin can put in. All of a sudden, the Republican candidate, or at least one of the Republican candidates, has enough money to take on Pritzker.
And so the real look, there's Avery Bourne there. She is running as his mate, as his lieutenant governor mate. She is a female. She's from downstate. She's young, 29. She's a rising star, it said, in the Republican Party. Look, this was put together carefully. The big question, how is Richard Irvin going to do in the Republican primary? A lot of people think he'd do quite nicely against J.B. Pritzker in the general, but can he win in the primary? He is now the fifth major candidate in that race. And look, he can do a good ad, and he's got experience. And he is black, and that's an asset for a Republican running statewide against J.B. Pritzker.
Well, that's right. I mean,
as we
know,
much of an asset is
something like
running in the primary?
90% of the black voters go Democratic. So if the Republicans, if we're Irvin to make it through the primary, if the Republicans could pick up some portion of the black vote and increase their portion of the vote from 10% to 18, 20%, that would be real damaging to Pritzker's chance for re-election. One of the criticisms I expect to hear from a number of quarters, possibly from some of the other Republican candidates, is that they're going to say that Richard Irvin isn't really a Republican, that he's been supportive of Joe Biden in the past and Hillary Clinton and others. He said nice things about J.B. Pritzker as the mayor of Aurora that he is. So, some people are going to question, and we've heard that already, that
Yes,
Jeannie
but
Ives
just
is one who
interrupt and say-
says this guy's not a real Republican.
Well, yeah, Jeannie Ives can on Mike Flannery's show, Flannery on Fire, and she just said he's not the right guy. She didn't say who was, and Flannery did not press her, but she just said he's not the right guy. When asked about when Flannery asked her about his position on abortion, she said it's mixed, but she said it's more to the point. She says we need somebody who's stood up, who's not just coming out after there's funding to run this. So implying that's Ken Griffin there, and that's the money. So she does not like him as a candidate, and she made that quite clear. And Flannery had Tom Cross on, who does like him as a candidate. I don't know if that's a plus for Richard Irvin in the primary. It's a strange choice. You might Tom Cross is a nice
we
guy.
should say, is the former Republican leader of the Illinois House of Representatives. He ran for state treasurer and lost. We haven't heard a whole lot about Tom Cross since then. But I would say that he is not the kind of Republican, Tom Cross, as far as an endorsement, that is amenable to the Trump voters. So if you're trying to get the Republican base, the Trump voter, at least within Illinois.
Well, not just, excuse me, Terry, but the Republican base is not completely, beholden or enamored with Donald Trump. Many are. So
That's
it's not
true.
exactly an equal.
No, that is
It's
true.
not exact, but the base is broader, and the question is the Republican base going to like seeing Tom Cross out there viewed as a moderate? He was brought to us by Denny Hastert, not exactly a good name in Republican circles at this point, or any circles. And many people say he's part of the old the Daily Ryan Combine that John Cass called it. People who are in to benefit themselves and use government to do so.
Well,
I'm
let's
not
not
saying
make too
Cross
much of
does
Tom
that.
Cross right here.
Some say that.
Look,
Well,
as
okay.
everyone knows.
Well, let me just
go ahead. What?
Go ahead. Well, okay. You said there'll be criticism. I've spoken with Gary Rabine already. Look, I sent out a text to all the 5 candidates. The only one I got a response from at the moment was Gary Rabine. Rabine was filled. He had plenty to say, as you would expect, negative.
Let me
about
remind
Richard
people.
Irvin. He said, look, he said he's not a Democrat. He says maybe he should run in the Democratic primary.
Here's just we can remind people. This is Gary Rabine here. And go ahead, what you're saying. This is from an interview.
Well,
that Jeff
so
did.
Rabine, people remember we've had Rabine on my show. We did 2 interviews with him, 2 parts. And he's a self-made businessman. Calls himself Ditch Digger CEO because he went right out of high school into starting a business, which now I could say, having talked with Gary Rabine, puts it at something like his net worth on those companies, $60 to $100 million. So he's a man of substantial wealth. A lot of it may not be liquid, people understand what that means. But he's also got a big network, Job Creators Network. He's a founder, and he comes right after that Supreme Court victory. We all know, but we don't know that a lot of that was the Job Creators Network and Gary Rabine.
Well, remind the people what the Supreme Court victory was.
Well, the Supreme Court victory was knocking down the mandate that would say, what was it, affect 80 million workers, companies that had 80 more than 100 employees were going to be subject to requiring their employees to be vaccinated, essentially.
And this was that, I mean, to be clear for the folks, this was not the Illinois Supreme Court, this is the U.S. Supreme Court.
U.S. Supreme Court, and so Rabine explaining to me, and this is in a Wall Street Journal ad, you can see that a week ago, they were major players in that lawsuit. Okay, maybe they were even the party in the lawsuit. I haven't looked at the lawsuit myself. All I'm saying is that's an accomplishment.
It is.
And that's big in Illinois because, you know, there's a big movement in the Republican primary. There are a lot of people upset with the vaccine mandates, the mask mandates, and Rabine and Bailey are going to be running on that. So Irvin, we don't know about.
So Richard Irvin has moved up.
We're going to have to find out what he says.
And we got Gary Rabine, as you just talked about. Another key person is Jesse Sullivan. Jesse Sullivan, a lot of people say he looks like Tom Brady, the football player. You've also interviewed him. Let's take a listen at a recent ad that Sullivan just put out.
Deployed as a civilian intelligence analyst in Afghanistan, I know corrupt war zones torn apart by violence. But this isn't Afghanistan, this is Chicago. Pritzker's leftist agenda is literally killing us, turning parts of Illinois into a war zone. But I've got a plan. Defend our police, not defund them, and take the cuffs off our cops and put them back on criminals. My name is Jesse Sullivan, candidate for governor. Join me. Let's save Illinois.
That's fine. This is the big topic.
Well, there he is, Jesse Sullivan. Good-looking guy, family man. He often puts his kids in some of the ads. I don't know how many people have yet picked up on his candidacy, but what are your thoughts on Mr. Sullivan? Well,
the big point here, we saw the first ad from Richard Irvin. We've seen this major ad coming out about the same time from Jesse Sullivan. They're hitting him on crime. They're hitting him on crime. Have I said that enough, Speaker Walsh? They're hitting him on crime. Maybe the speaker's watching this. They're hitting him on the crime. Because you know what? People are saying, what speaker? Well, okay, let's talk about the Sullivan ad. It's a great ad. It focuses on crime. It's not saying he repeats faith, family, and service. That's important. But he's hitting the themes here of crime. That's what's on people's mind. And that's in the Republican primary. That's in the general election.
I think that's going to be a national issue, Jeff. I mean, not just in the...
Not gonna be. It is.
And this whole thing that we saw in the summer of 2020 with Wisconsin and Oregon and any number of other cities over the summer of violence, the riots in Chicago and Grant Park where they were throwing things at the police there. We just had this week 2 police officers killed in New York City. People are fed up, and this idea that we were supposed to defund the police, pushed by Black Lives Matter, the Vice President of the United States saying we ought to contribute to getting people who are arrested out on bail. This is, I think, going to be a major issue to come back and smack the many of the Democrats running across the country.
Here's what I just keep coming back to Speaker.
I think they got a lot of liability.
I keep coming back to the leadership in the Democratic Party
in Illinois, in the House.
In Illinois, the leadership in the House doesn't recognize that crime is an effing big problem.
Let's remind people that it was literally in the last minutes of the previous legislature, just a year ago. The old legislature went out of business. The new one was sworn in 1 year ago. And literally in the last minutes, they passed the Safety Act, which reformed some of the ways that the police can handle suspects when they're being arrested. And the police, a lot of police are upset about that. We have a number of sheriffs across Illinois resigning. So again, it's just we're underscoring the fact that there are liabilities on the Democratic side of the aisle because of the crime explosion, as we saw in the ad here, 836 people murdered in Chicago in 21.
The Republican Party of Illinois and Jim Durkin, which people would criticize, say haven't been saying a lot. They're saying this: that bill that passed, that Democrats are so proud of, they're saying that should be repealed. Well, that ain't going to happen without a bunch of Democrats changing on that. But the point is, what does the speaker says? He says, "Oh, they're all mistaken. That hasn't even gone into effect yet. That couldn't be the cause of the problem." You're wrong. Wrong, 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 right? If you go to Cook County, which is major in the state, 5 million people, the crime problem there is not the Safety Act, which hasn't been gone into effect yet, if it hasn't. It's that we have a nexus of people who are harmful to, who are soft on crime. That's the only way to put it. We have the chief judge of the Circuit Court of Illinois, Tim Evans, who says it's his bail reform. He doesn't need bail reform coming from the state. For years now, for several years, he has already said, we're just cutting out cash bond. We're not going to require any bond. We're going to turn these people back on the streets. That's the way it should be. They've not been guilty yet. They're presumed innocent. And that's Toni Preckwinkle, who's supporting that chief judge. Preckwinkle, people don't know, she's the Cook County Board president. And chief judge is working in tandem with the state's attorney of Cook County, that is Kim Foxx. That's the nexus. Some would say the axis of evil, okay? Fox and Evans and Preckwinkle and Lightfoot going soft on that. John Cass wrote a column recently. He's a major columnist, recently retired from the Chicago Tribune, but Cass is really well known throughout Chicago. And he said, when you read a story, Cass is a big time journalist, don't just look at what's said, look at what wasn't said. And when people write about crime, for some reason, they never mention what I mentioned. Preckwinkle's the head. Preckwinkle is the person, as Cook County, as chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party, she is the person involved in slating these judges. The judges are the ones that don't require bail. The circuit court judges of Cook County work in tandem with their chief judge, who tells them what he wants them to do. And and then Preckwinkle puts Fox there as state's attorney, and then the state's attorney doesn't prosecute.
Well, and again,
the Illinois legislature has short sentences, and the Illinois legislature, pushed a lot by Cook County, they're the ones who says, oh, great criminal justice reform. You know what we've done? We've given out a lot of marijuana licenses to people who were hurt by. The point is, I mean, look, this Kim Foxx, Kim Gardner in St. Louis, Gaston out in L.A. We've got prosecutors, the most recent now in New York City, who are being elected, and these are prosecutors who are saying they're not going to prosecute. Crime is going to be a major issue. And speaking of judges, Jeff, right now we just have, as we are taping it, the news came out today that Stephen Breyer, Justice of the Supreme Court, is going to be leaving. This means that President Biden will be able to nominate a judge to his liking before the Republicans, most likely, according to the polling, will take control of the Senate. And no doubt that was a major issue for Stephen Breyer to be leaving, because famously President Trump had 3 nominees to the Supreme Court, and in part because I'm dropping her name, who the judge who died in, who was the woman judge? Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I had her visualized. I couldn't think of her name. Ruth Bader Ginsburg should have resigned when she had Obama. She didn't, and so Trump got the nomination. So Breyer is being a little more respectful to President Biden and taking a look at how the elections might go in November and deciding to be leaving the court. Now,
yeah, that'll be a national issue, because Biden has already promised he was going to appoint a black female, which was the first appointment he had for a judgeship. So we'll examine the views of that black female who will likely be nominated by Biden on crime. And there are already names that are circulating. We can go into that. Because this will happen very soon. So by the time Breyer steps down.
When you look at the polling of the vice president, Kamala Harris, famously picked because Biden said he was going to pick a black woman to run as his running mate, I think a lot of voters, when you're hearing what you're saying, are saying, I hope he picks a better judge than he picked as a vice president.
Yeah, how much more are we going to take of our ethos and the country being to pick people by their gender,
Remember when it
by
used to
their
be we're going
color?
to pick the person who's right for the job? It
Yeah,
wasn't
do
the
we have to
checking
keep
the gender
reminding
box and
people?
the,
Do
the
we
race
have to
box.
keep reminding people what Martin Luther King said in his famous dream speech? He had a dream that someday people will judge others by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I mean, it's Chief Justice Roberts, I think, was the one who said, how do you stop discrimination? Well, you stop discriminating. If you want to stop discrimination on race, which used to be our goal, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was supposed to stop discrimination based on race. Okay, based on race. That was the main aspect of the Civil Rights Act of
In
1964.
this,
And now, according to the Democratic Party, we want to do more and more discrimination based on
and
race.
I'm not,
It doesn't make sense,
you and
does
I
it?
are not suggesting that he can't find a very qualified person to be on the court who is a woman or a woman of color. That's not the issue.
Right.
But when you go out and say, I'm not going to be looking at all the qualified candidates, but I'm specifically going to be picking a woman of color, I think a lot of voters will look at that for what it is pandering. And that by itself, I think, could also have an impact on these election items. President Biden likely thinks it's going to help him with the voters. We'll have to see. But I think a number of people from around the country looking at the polling are just getting fed up with this politics of division and saying, why don't we just come out and, even if privately you want to pick a woman of color, maybe it's better just not to say that and then just say we looked at any number of candidates and we came up with a very qualified candidate.
Right. And if you go to the mainstream media, they're already putting forth the likely nominees. Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's Circuit Court of Appeals, D.C., very prestigious court, happens to be black. She's number one to the person to their of the names they're putting out. Leandra Kruger from the California Supreme Court happens to be black. CNN put up pictures of 10 justices. 6 of them were black women, I believe. There's nothing, again, wrong with any of these women. It's just, as you say, shouldn't we be judging them by the content of their character, by their qualifications, by their experience, by what we know of their positions and how they will function as a jurist? Or should we be judging them simply, are they a black female? I mean, that's really, I think we need to start getting back to the dream of Martin Luther King Jr., judging people by the content of their character. We need to do it in Illinois. And that takes us, Terry, to critical race theory, which is a major issue. It'll be a major issue, I bet, in the governor's election, because, there are people who say, well, we don't really teach critical race theory in Illinois, so why are they talking about that? Right. We don't have a course in critical race theory. But almost nobody will deny, and this is what came up in Virginia with the election of Governor Youngkin, it's the tenets of critical race theory. The idea that we have people good, currently we're saying people who are black are good, people who are white are the oppressors and they're bad. That is the completely antithetical to everything that Dr. Martin Luther King stood for. And so we need to start in Illinois, when we talk about the governor's race, what are we teaching in our schools, in our public schools? Are we teaching
Well,
that whites are
look, we got
oppressors?
CRT, and as you and I have talked about on this show before, we have the new law mandating sex ed for young kids,
Right.
From kindergarten to and up, and a lot of parents are very upset about that. We're going to have to see how a lot of this plays out at the congressional race. Obviously, all the congressional races across the country for the U.S. House of Representatives are up. And one of the other key issues, as we have seen throughout the year, and especially in the polling, is immigration and the open border. And you recently were interviewing Esther Joy King, a Republican candidate running in the district that is now occupied by Sherry Bustos, who is not running for re-election, and she talked on that issue of immigration. Let's take a listen.
Think that drugs would be an issue in Savannah?
I was talking with a officer who is on the drug beat in one of the small rural towns. He's like, Esther, every ounce of drugs that we're taking into possession, you test them, they're all from Mexico. Everything.
What are they?
People are dying. Fentanyl. Fentanyl is
that's 17th. They're saying that
across western rural Illinois.
And they're coming in across the border. You think?
It is. Yep.
Okay.
It's very
so what
easy
would you
to
do?
determine.
Look, you know something. Unlike
Jeff,
our
it
Vice
starts with
President.
securing the border. We are a nation. The very foundation of a nation state is sovereignty as a nation.
Yeah.
How do you come by sovereignty? Borders.
Borders.
So there you see it. Esther Joy King is talking about borders. She's talking about our southern border, and she says, in a sense now, every state is a border state, because Illinois is a border state because in her district, the 17th congressional district, she's getting a lot of illegal fentanyl coming in, other illegal drugs coming across from the southern border, and that's a problem even in a district that is to a large extent rural. I mean, it has Peoria and it has Bloomington, it has Rockford, but it has a bunch of rural areas, and even in those areas, and I was surprised to hear this, drugs, illegal drugs, fentanyl is a major problem, and so the border is an issue, and inflation is an issue, and public safety is an issue, and education and CRT are issues. So these things we're talking about, and I've said, and I need to see it's picked up by other media here now, that her district, the 17th, might be the most likely Republican pickup throughout the country. Why? Because Esther Joy King ran in 2020. We're not endorsing anybody. We're just pointing out facts. She ran against somebody who was an 8-year incumbent of that time, Sherry Bustos, Democratic leadership, and she came, if she flipped 7,000 votes, she would have won in 2020. So that makes her, I would say, a strong favorite to pick that up, to recapture the 17th, recapture it for the Republicans, and maybe lead that wave, which turns the U.S. House red, Republican.
It looks
and
like that when you look at the
Republican.
polls.
We'll
The polls are overwhelmingly in favor of the Republicans taking back the House and the Senate at this point. The House is almost a guarantee unless something dramatically changes. The Senate less likely, but still leaning Republican, according to most of the polling at this time.
And just mentioned, to be fair, we've mentioned 3 of the Republican candidates in the primary. We've mentioned we've mentioned Jesse Sullivan. We've mentioned Richard Irvin. We've mentioned Gary Rabine. Also mentioned, of course, Darren Bailey from downstate, really well known downstate, really working hard. Paul Schimpf. So that's 5 there. There are a few less known, less major candidates. But I know people in the media, mainstream media, they're still trying to learn how to pronounce Gary Rabine's name and learning how to pronounce, they're calling, I won't say what they're calling, but they're not getting Paul Schimpf's name. So it's time for the mainstream media, if you can't do anything else, why don't you at least learn how to pronounce the names of the candidates? And, give them some equal time. This is an important race, who wins this primary, because that person is going to be facing J.B. Pritzker. And maybe you shouldn't presume who the winner is there. Maybe we should have a real contest in Illinois where state House seats are up, state Senate seats are up, the governor's race is up. There's now a statewide
crime,
ticket.
we got
race for attorney
education,
general.
we got COVID.
Right.
I think all of these, sex ed in the schools, I think all of these. I think we have an enraged electorate, and we're going to have to see how it explodes onto the scene.
Yeah, so I urge people, let's get people informed on the issues. If Pritzker wants to run on abortion, that's fine. If he doesn't want to talk about crime, I can understand that. He doesn't want to talk about inflation, I can understand that. He doesn't want to talk
Jeff,
about taxes, I can understand
The race
that.
is on, and we'll be covering it. And so, folks, thanks for watching. Let us know if you have a favorite in the governor's race. Tell us who it is. Until next week, Jeff, we'll say goodbye.